Mercedes S-Class is one of the biggest and strongest cars in the world. It's also one of the safest. But in Paris, on August 31st, 1997, this car was involved in the most notorious car crash of all time. The Mercedes was carrying 4 passengers, a chauffeur, a bodyguard, the Princess of Wales, and her boyfriend. They were reportedly speeding away from photographers when their car approached a narrow underpass. Professor Murray Mackay is Britain's leading car crash investigator. Using official reports from the French police investigation, he's reconstructed what happened.
According to the accident investigators, this is where the accident began. About 20 past midnight, the Mercedes is coming along this road on the left bank of the Seine towards the Alma Bridge. It heads down towards the underpass, and it's estimated at that time it speeds about 70 miles an hour. What happens next is based on the evidence that we have so far. As he comes down into the tunnel, he's faced with a slow-moving Fiat. He steers to the left. Because he's just come over a crest, the steering's light, he probably puts in too much steering, so he's heading towards the center columns. He corrects right, and now he's heading directly for the Fiat Uno.
According to police reports, the Mercedes sideswiped the Fiat, but the only damage so far was a broken mirror and a smashed taillight.
Was the Fiat just an innocent motorist returning late at night, or was there something more sinister than that? We may never know. The French police have given up the search for that vehicle. What we do know is that at this time in the accident sequence, the actions of the driver of the Mercedes were not those of somebody who was normal and alert.
A 106-foot skid mark shows the Mercedes driver pulled the steering wheel back to the left. The car jumped the pavement and smashed head-on into column 13. The car spun around and ended up facing in the direction it had come from. Mackay thinks the Fiat drove by without stopping.
Speed, a driver under the influence of alcohol, the unexpected encounter with the Fiat, these all played their part. But you must remember that from the time the car entered the tunnel until it came to rest after the impact, that's only about 2 seconds. Newspapers have talked luridly of speeds of 120 miles an hour, but looking at the damage tells a very different story. It suggests an impact with the pillar of about 60 miles an hour. And we know that the car came to rest about 15 feet from the pillar, spinning out, and that means about 10 miles an hour exit speed from the pillar. So the change in velocity was slightly less than 50 miles an hour. And it's that change in velocity which is crucial in terms of the severity of the crash to which the occupants were exposed. This was a severe but a survivable accident, and what we now need to consider is why did 3 people...
So he thinks that this is a survivable accident. Is it really? Do you think this is survivable?
And it's that
if you're driving by
change in
and if you see a car
velocity, which is crucial in terms
badly damaged
of the severity of the...
Are you thinking to yourself, this is survivable? What do you think?
No.
No, right? I mean, you're driving by, and does it surprise you that there are 4 people in this car and 3 of them are dead? No, right? It makes perfect sense. You look at the damage and you say, yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't seem survivable.
Who's the only person that survived in that crash? What side of the vehicle were they on?
All right, the only person who survived was the bodyguard. And the bodyguard was sitting up front, obviously, on the passenger side. And he was the only one who survived. All right, so, all right, guys, here's the difference between me and you. I'm driving by, I see this. I go, okay, perfect, this is survivable. Car did its job. The car is designed to crumple. All right, you want the car to crumple as much as possible. What's surprising is 3 out of 4 people are dead. It's not supposed to happen. Why is it that I'm so confident that this is survivable? And why is it that this guy is so confident that this is survivable? This has to be survivable. They make the car crushable so that you can survive somewhere. All right, so let's go back to the numbers.
After the impact, that's only about 2 seconds.
So it takes 2 seconds to get to the 13th floor. And then the impact. Estimated initial speed. The impact is.
Newspapers have talked luridly of speeds of 120 miles an hour, but looking at the damage tells a very different story. It suggests an impact with the pillar of about 60 miles an hour.
So initial speed is about 60.
And we know that the car came to rest about 15 feet from the pillar, spinning out, and that means about 10 miles an hour.
Final speed is 10 miles per hour. So what's the change in velocity here? The initial velocity is 60, the final velocity is 10. So what's the change in velocity? It's 50 miles per hour. Like it's like crash test.
Exit speed from the pillar.
All right, so the only thing we need to know at this point is what is the impact time? Where do you get the impact time from? Impact times are built into these vehicles. You get your impact time from the crumple zone, crumpling of the car. It's going to give you your impact time. It's about 1/10 of a second. So at 40 to 50 miles per hour, impact time is about 1/10 of a second. So within 1/10 of a second, the car goes from 60 miles per hour to 10 miles per hour. So what is the acceleration? All right, so the acceleration in this crash, and I've done the calculations for you. All right, so change in velocity is 50 miles per hour within 1/10 of a second. That's 22 Gs. Right? That's survival. What do you think? Yes or no? Can you survive 22 Gs for 10th of a second?
Yeah.
How do we know that, Jen?
Because in the last experiment, you said that a person could survive up to 25
Right
Gs.
here, I'm gonna give you 5 points. Absolutely, right? John Stat was able to survive that. Up to 1.4 seconds, guys. That's up to 1.4 seconds. That's a duration which is 14 times larger than what this car is exposed to. An old guy was able to survive it. Same sort of force, same sort of G load for a duration which is 14 times longer than what these people were exposed to. And he survived just fine. His breathless got beat up, and then he recovered. Yet you have 4 people in this car. 3 of them are dead. One of them, the bodyguard, he's the only survivor, and he survived barely. What went wrong? It's not the car's fault. These people must have done something that they weren't supposed to. Does anybody know what the problem was?
Maybe didn't wear their seatbelts.
Say it again. Seatbelt. Give yourself 5 points. It doesn't matter.
Strangely, Princess Diana, sitting where I am in the right rear, had the best chance of survival because the impact was concentrated on the left front of the car, and as it hit the pillar, it also rotated and span out, so she went partly past the pillar and didn't have quite the same crash forces applied to her as happened to the people sitting on the left. If she'd been wearing a seatbelt, she'd have had a fair chance of surviving even this
So she wasn't wearing a seatbelt,
extreme accident.
and who cares?
But, unbelted, she was thrown forward.
Who else was not wearing a seatbelt that day? Her fiance sitting next to her. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt either. Who else wasn't wearing a seatbelt? Driver was not wearing a seatbelt either. The only person who was wearing a seatbelt was the bodyguard.
To strike the back of the front
And the bodyguard was seated right here.
passenger seat. The
So she lunges forward, hits the back of the front seat, and then back of the front seat brakes. Bodyguard lunges in the forward direction, smashes his head against the dashboard, and he has no recollection of what happened to him. No recollection. He was in a coma for about 2 weeks.
door pillar,
And he's the only survivor.
and then was tossed around after the main accident took place and the vehicle span out.
Why does it matter that you have to wear your seatbelt? What's the worst that can happen if you're not wearing a seatbelt? Is a backseat passenger. You go forward with the back of the front seat. That's it. What does that feel like? It feels like a pillow. In this state, Illinois, I'm in Illinois, and you guys are in California. Up until 6 years ago, the lawmakers here decided that if you're a backseat passenger, you didn't have to wear a seatbelt. These lawmakers, most of them are attorneys, evidently expert physicists at the same time, decided that nothing that feels like a pillow could ever harm you. That's the reason why pillow fight is perfectly legal in every single state. And I used to fume around
Straight to strike the back of the front unbelted in this, been wearing a seat sitting on the left.
in slow motion, guys. Impact is gonna last 10th of a second. Car's impact lasts 10th of a second. It's a fraction of a second. It's 1/10 of a second.
If she'd been wearing a seatbelt,
Dummy goes
she'd
forward,
have had a fair chance of
makes contact with the back of the front seat,
surviving even this
and then
extreme accident.
within that 1/10 of a second of impact time,
But, unbelted, she was thrown forward to strike the back of the front passenger seat. The
and then she gets thrown back.
door pillar,
This impact is much shorter than 10th of a second.
and then
She also changes direction,
was tossed around after the main accident took place and the vehicle span out.
hitting the back of the front seat. Your impact time is much, much shorter than 10th of a second. The worst case scenario is going to be about 1/100th of a second if you're hitting a dashboard or a steering wheel. That's the case within 1/100th of a second, your acceleration is going to be over 200 Gs. That's it. That's survival. 20 Gs is 200 Gs, you're on your own. You can survive, according to the latest numbers, up to 140 Gs. Is it possible to survive above that? It may be. We don't have any records of it as yet. So 100 and 140 Gs for a fraction of a second is as far as it can go. And these guys, these people who were not wearing seatbelts, all of them were above 140 Gs. All of them. So they didn't survive. It didn't work out. All right, so if you're not wearing a seatbelt, worst case scenario is over 200 Gs. Impact time is going to be much shorter. Car's impact time is going to be 10th of a second. You get the impact time from the crumple zone. And the car collisions at 40 to 50 miles per hour is going to be about 20 to 22 Gs. That's it. So it is possible to survive up to 140 Gs. So we got 2 conclusions. 25 Gs, survivable up to a few seconds. 140 Gs, maybe survivable under extreme constraint. So why would the car companies would not build indestructible cars? If that's the case. What would happen to your impact time if the car is indestructible? How much of an impact time do you have? Your impact time would be infinitely small, right? So which means that you would have almost a 0 impact time. If your impact time is that small, what happens to the acceleration? acceleration is going to be infinitely long. All right, so your velocity is changing in time. All right, T represents the duration. It represents the time it takes for you to go from this speed to that speed. All right, so this is the time it's going to take. So the question is, why is it that the car companies will not build indestructible cars? What happens to your impact time? When your impact time goes down, what happens to the acceleration is going to go up? All right, so if you shorten the duration, acceleration is going to go up. If your impact time goes to 0, what happens to the acceleration? So when you actually have a 0 impact time, what happens to your acceleration? Right? Any number divided by 0, what do you get?
Oh, no.
Any number divided by 0, what do you get?
0.
No, you wouldn't get 0. You just have to point source anyone. All right, so you wouldn't get 0. Take 1 divided by 0, what do you get? Take 2 divided by 0, what do you get? Any number divided by 0, just remember this because this is going to be important in astronomy in general. Any number divided by 0 is going to be infinity. Number is going to be infinitely large. A number which is infinitely large is known as undefined. Number is so big that you cannot possibly define it. All right, so if you have a car, indestructible car, what would be the acceleration of that car? Acceleration of that car would be nearly infinitely large. It would be nice to have an indestructible car if you're in the habit of loaning your car out to your friends and family members, because in worst case scenario, you know that car is going to be fine, right? But it's not a safe car to drive under any circumstances. So what does the airbag do for you? All right, so let's now go in the opposite direction. So what does the airbag do for you? Airbag is going to increase your impact time. When you increase the impact time, what happens to the acceleration? It goes down. So the airbag is going to increase the impact time roughly about a second. And when you increase the impact time, the acceleration is going to go down. So it's going to be roughly about 2 Gs. So it becomes so much. All right, so the car companies make cars crushable because they're trying to increase the impact time. By increasing the impact time, they try to reduce the acceleration. And where do you get your impact time from? You get your impact time from your comfort zone.